welcome to the next episode of Let's Talk Agile. I'm here with Dr. Simon Wallace. Now, I love last name Wallace because, Simon, Dr. Simon. What should I call you? Should I call you
Simon's grand. Simon's grand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Simon will be grand. He's the Mel Gibson or the, William Wallace of the organizational AI / agile / everything that's wrong with companies type of guy. Now, Simon, I'm pretty impressed with your experience being a statistician, then becoming data scientist, becoming head of AI, and then transitioning into entrepreneurship. So you have a pretty versatile experience. Another thing that I really liked is I saw a podcast with you recently with another host where they called you royalty. So I'm not sure why they call you royalty, but let's get started with that. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Alex, you're too kind. So hi, I'm Simon, and yeah, basically I have had a very varied career. I started out in academia. Then I realized that the world of academia isn't quite for me. And then I went into a big multinational org. Then I got bit by the startup bug. And ever since then, I've been hooked on that dragon. And over the past 5 years or so, it's been startups. And over the past couple of years, I've been doing a lot more kind of consulting with startups, scale-ups, SMEs, as well as working with investors to give them the kind of understanding. The joke that I say, which shouldn't hit as much as I do, is I'm a tech nerd who learned how to speak human. And that is very much what my skill set is. And that translational building and going, okay, right, what's the value here? How do we build it? How do we focus on what value it brings rather than, ooh, look, a shiny piece of technology. So yeah, very varied, very rounded. It's been a weird career so far, and it's seeming to be even more interesting moving forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say like a tech nerd learning to speak business because I can truly relate. I was always an engineer. I did not care for business at all when I was, kind of coding head down. I kind of just listened, but it was like conversations, kind of nebulous. Didn't really care much until I got promoted a couple times. And now I started to take on more responsibilities and had to really understand why we were doing what we were doing. But early on, I was happy being a lab rat. Was your experience pretty similar?
Kind of. This is very early in the podcast. We're going to find myself getting into trouble here. Because where I found it was I had a great CTO, a good friend of mine. By that meaning, I have been drunk with him on several occasions. But what I always was impressed by him was he was an Australian chap. And he was very human, right? He was very good at being able to talk to the coders and talk to the business and really cut through all the bull and be like, right, okay, this makes sense. And I've always had a lot of good mentors who, again, have been very erudite and very able to just cut through everything and go, right, okay, here's the value. What I found is that they are the exception. So I've worked with a lot of startups, like I said, and I've worked with larger organizations. And I have to be honest, I found quite a lot of the technical leadership wanting in that department. And so when I was looking at it going, hang on, where is this replication of this guy who inspired me? Where is this leadership that we're seeing? Well, it wasn't there. And it's not a fault on any of those guys. It's the point of we just don't train leaders. We don't train that ability. What we seem to do is say, hey, look, Alex, you're really good at coding. Now we want to give you a promotion. Oh, and by the way, this promotion now comes with management and leadership and business development, business strategy. But don't worry, you'll learn it along the way. And so for me, it was, well, hang on, that's missing. And then we look at them complain and wonder, oh, well, the tech team doesn't speak human, so let's not talk to them. They don't understand it. It's like, well, actually, that's a failing that with some work, I can work towards, which is why I've started making that transition a lot more. Because I've been coding since I was 15 years of age, coding Flash games on Newgrounds, right? And then I went into data because I was always into maths, and stats was that perfect combination of coding. And so over the past, like I say, again, 3-5 years, I've really started moving more back into my kind of software development coding roots to move into that point of, right, there's a real need for that business translational layer for tech people who know that their leader can speak tech, but also business people who know that they're not going to go into a meeting going, oh God, I don't want to speak to him. So that's very much what I found.
Yeah, so it's kind of leadership by Taylorism, right? We kind of
Basically,
pick
yeah.
up experience and we try to follow based on what we know. And there's an interesting trend. Over the past 20 years, we kind of seen a big shift from your sort of MBA type CTOs and VPs of engineering to more hands-on delivery types, like developers that are getting promoted.
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons in that environment, right? Like people that come out of tech, they tend to concentrate on tech and forget that to lift their head above water because that's comfort level. And also they dive a little bit too deep. I'm not going to forget, I worked at this company and I had a manager who decided that they were going to code review my code. And they didn't really do a good job. We got into an argument where it just didn't make sense. Like I was given bad advice. And, I was already an architect at that point. So, I knew better, but there was no real need for somebody to go and code review. But that was the style of the quote unquote new management. While previously the leaders were primarily concentrated around business. So I think we're kind of like, the rubber band is swinging both sides.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at different organizational sizes, and one of the areas that I wanted to talk to you about, small versus large orgs, I think it leans more towards technical and less towards business.
Yeah. And I would agree with you. And so this is part and parcel why, like, I decided to start doing a lot more writing about these topics. So I've been updated recently because I've been busy with the projects, but I created this Substack called the Technician's MBA. To your point, right? Which is we see so many MBAs in CTO positions who don't know the technical, who are a lot more business focused rather than tech focused. And look, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, we can get into it further. But I know, most likely the viewers and listeners know as well, that a lot of technical people don't respect leadership who don't know how to be technical. And they just write it off. But at the
there's
same
a little
time,
bit.
yeah,
There's a little bit of that lack of respect, dismissive type of, oh, you don't really understand my world, right?
yeah. And the same thing happens on the other side, right? There's a lot of the leadership, the business C-suite don't respect somebody who hasn't got their background or knows what they're talking about. And the most common way in which I've ever seen this, and it's something that I have no problem in terms of calling this out and showing this up, is jargon or TLAs, 3-letter acronyms, because they're used as the most exclusionary thing. And I find them more fun than I should. I have great fun going into these meetings going, oh, so what does that mean? Just to confirm for the room what we all mean by this 3-letter acronym. A couple of times my sadistic streak, a couple of times you'll see someone going, oh Christ, I don't actually know what that means. Shit. And it's relatively funny, but then again, I'm sometimes evil. But that jargon barrier is something which the Technician's MBA was designed to kind of help, right? Because like I said, I was lucky with having a lot of really good mentors who told me and taught me and guided me on how to inhabit this world, which was alien to me. But there are things like change management. There are things like project planning. There are things like hiring, right? Which people are expected to do, but there isn't actually a handbook for it. And I think that's that point of trying to bridge that gap, because you are very right. We are seeing that rubber band swing back from it was MBA, now it's technical, and now it's here. But the point is, those two extremes are just people standing on opposite sides of a cliff. There's no bridge between them.
And it really depends on the individual, right?
Exactly. Good leadership is not something is something you can teach, but it's not something where you can identify. It comes from experience and knowledge. And I hate the fact that it does, right? But a textbook in leadership doesn't tell you the reality on the ground, but just doing it and being, oh, I learned and I don't have any formal qualifications. Well, that's not good either, right? Because there's a lot of good learning and a lot of good information that's contained within this. You can't You can't choose one side or the other. The great combinations are from those great combinations. So for me, I think, yeah, the rubber band effect is always a great example, right? Because eventually it bounces back and it lands in inertia around this pinpoint, right?
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to do that, the key thing that we need to remember is there has to be training, right? There has to be that ability to make it work in terms of both aspects. And is why I say, a tech nerd who learned how to speak human, I have to have that translational ability. And that's what I think a lot of developers need to develop a lot more, is that translational ability. Because we could talk about, for example, I've been, like every developer, I've been getting used to using agentic AI and, agentic programming and vibe coding, whatever you want to call it. And what I think that's quite interesting in there is I look at it and I look at what's coming out. And the tech nerd in me goes, well, the optimization of the database operations is absolutely terrible. The SQL queries are awful. Why is it doing a for loop and running the query 20 times? Run it once, filter it. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's all of this. Right? And that's what the tech nerd says. But if I have to communicate that to a client, I can't say that. That makes no sense to them. So what I do say is,
with the business problem.
So what I tend to say then in that exact situation is, look, it's going to cost you more money. Your website is going to take longer to load, and users are going to walk away as a result of it. This is why we need to spend time fixing it. They don't care about what the root cause is. They care about the impact. And if you can sell the impact, then you can buy the time to build the solution you need.
Yeah, there's a mentor that I have in analytics, and he always says, Alex, make sure that whenever you frame something in terms of data, you always add a comma on the end and say, so what? Right? Because the data really implies. But I love the acronym stuff. It's like we're gonna do the POC for the MVP to deliver this with the SLA for the MVC, and we're gonna build it with CI using the TDD. You're like, right? You just mind just goes boom.
I have a brilliant acronym which I use all the time, which is relates to your so what, which I teach everyone, called the WGAF test. Everything you do has to pass WGAF, WGAF, and it stands for who gives a, and you can assume what the last. And the point is, if you can't answer that, well, then no one gives a. So why the hell are you talking about it?
Yeah, it's almost like companies talking about transformation, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, we're going to transform. And then they're like, well, our developers are not adapting. And I'm like, did you whiff them? They're like, what do you mean whiff them? And I go, well, every developer, when you're doing the transformation, what's in it for me? You can't just do it in the silo and say it's good for the organization. Well, how does that benefit the actual person?
You don't think this goes to the whole principle about change management, right? Change management is this thing which every time I've talked about it, I can see established business people look like they're about to piss themselves because it's scary. Oh my God, change. It's like, but actually change management has been truly in the true sense of the word, bastardized to be this negative, it means everyone's going to be made redundant. When in reality, change management is just a series of techniques. It's a big basket in which you can go through and actually go, okay, what can I do to make this change easier for people? Like you say, the WFM test, the WGAF test, all of these things, just make it so, how can I get what I want to happen effectively?
I actually don't like the term change management. I like to keep it much more simpler. I like to call it just improvement.
Yeah.
The
problem that exists,
change management has no emotion. It's this emotionless, this cold, like nobody wants to change. We want to improve.
Yeah.
We want to make certain things better for ourselves, for others.
But you and I both know that if you go into a room full of C-suite executives and say change management, that is going to elicit an entirely different type of reaction where they're going to go, oh, I like that. I read about that from a Harvard MBA. McKinsey do change management. Did you know that? Oh, and it's that point of, we talk about translation and we talk about, communication. Effective communication for me is, I agree with you. I don't like the term either. But when it's what people want to hear, and it gets you. It's ironically, change management as a term is a form of change management, right? It makes people like guess what you want, right?
Yeah, but I completely agree. But what I don't like is the whole fact that we have a lot of fake stuff in the industry.
Oh yeah,
If I want to get an award from, let's say, CIO review or whatever else, all I have to do is pay a little money and wait for the slot in the marketing where, I'm going to get an award. Doesn't mean that I deserve it. Doesn't mean there's anybody evaluating it, right? So, and I have ton of these emails that are just saying, oh, we're going to put it in every single publication. Oh, and you're going to be all this great and wonderful without even lifting a finger. All I need is just money. But it doesn't actually mean anything. It doesn't mean I'm doing anything different. And so what a lot of the C-suite are doing, they're following the trends of these analytics companies, and a lot of them base their findings on what? On who's footing the bill. So I feel like the entire industry is looking backwards. We need to start evaluating things for what they truly stand. I mean, I'll give you an example. So my top competitor, Atlassian, Jira, right? I mean, the worst product ever for what it is right now.
you're talking
And
about
Jargon
everybody
is
loves a
the
Jira ticket.
oh yeah,
Everybody loves
everybody.
Jira. Oh, it's makes
But
makes
it's
every
Jargon
developer's
is
day.
exactly. So, and you have this nonstop, this grading of other things. But what is it based on? The popularity, who pays the most and screams the loudest or has the biggest marketing team? You know, yeah, okay, that's true in the business world. You can compete in many facets, but I think a lot of it is really fake. And so, what the C-suite, I think they need to start taking more responsibility for individual thought rather than this group think and safety that a lot of them have been hiding behind, especially in the tech area.
You know that old saying, right? Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. You
Yeah,
know,
because I worked at IBM, I
there
would
you go.
know.
But it's the same point that I find, right? Demonstrandum, my business, whereas I call ourselves a small consultancy, right? But the fact is, when I go to some businesses, I had one guy, all credit to him, go, yeah, I like you. I like what you're talking about. But we're a big business. Why wouldn't we just buy a McKinsey? Because McKinsey's going to sell my board meeting. You're not. And at least he had the, honesty to say that to me, right? But I think so much of what you're talking about as well is we get what we measure, right? And the one which is absolutely doing my head in right now, and it sounds impressive and it sounds great. And you've got all these AI hype bros. Now, I'm an AI advocate, but I'm not going to go and buy 5 MacBook minis to basically just run 6 different terminals and waste my money that way, right? But you've got so many of these hype agents going, oh, I shipped 100,000 lines of code. Lines of code isn't the measure of productivity. I can write 100 lines of comments and that still counts as a line of code. But again, it's what people understand in terms of productivity. They see number go up, they see good. We talk about velocities and sprints. We see number of tickets cleared, we see number of tickets created, and we go, oh, that's good. But in reality, it's actually, well, okay, fine, we did a lot. And this is where I always, if I know the answer to this, if you know the answer to this, we should just end this podcast and build it, we'll be millionaires. It's measuring that impact. Because that impact is, we talked about WGAF, the what's in it for me test, the who gives it, all those tests, right? If we can address those, that's a more valuable measure than lines of code or velocity or clearance rate or whatever you want to call it. Being able to quantify, we're prioritizing this because we believe it's going to reduce our churn by 5%. They're
Yeah.
the really valuable things. But instead, we measure those things and we get stuck with lines of code. Where if I had a developer come out to me and say I wrote 50,000 lines of code, my response would be, and I picked up my dog's poop this morning. Like what's the impact here, right?
Especially with AI, right? Like you basically give it a prompt, it gives you the code. So that measure just outputs what your LLM produces. Not really that important. If it can solve the problem in less or more, it's completely irrelevant as long as it gets the job done. I agree. The biggest problem with all these goals is that a lot of them are lagging indicators. You're gonna finish up the work, produce whatever the features, but you're actually not gonna see the results until a year from now. Why? Because number one, the product marketing team needs time to accelerate whatever they do. And development always works in a silo, and they're like, product marketing is this other group. This whole disconnection of both disciplines is just kind of weird to me. In the startup world, it's all together. Once you grow a little bit, this other department that wants to know everything you're doing and has its own schedule, but it's not really clear if they're keeping up with it. Once they go that route, you'll only start seeing the tickers, but you got to start measuring early. By the time the measurement is being done, the product manager is going to go to another team. Another one's going to be hired. The goal is going to change because it's a quarter change, and nobody actually sees anything through it. So it's kind of like a weird dysfunction that just kind of feeds on itself.
Yeah, but I think as well, that's how so many large organizations operate, right? You've worked in them, I've worked in them. Like everyone loves a meeting. Where in reality, I had a CEO who was, again, brilliant, erudite, like a scalpel, who once, like in a meeting, stood up 10 minutes in going, do I need to be here? What's the point of this meeting? And the guy running it didn't have an answer. He was like, cool, I've got stuff to do, and just walked out. And he wasn't rude. It was just more the point of like, why? What is the point of this meeting? And if there's anything where I kind of hope AI can, alleviate some of this, right? Because look, you and I can translate business, but if you're dependent upon a singular individual to be in every meeting, to be in every process, that's not going to scale very well. What I really kind of hope we start using AI for more, rather than just, getting it to produce, I'm going to go back to the statement I'm about to make, mediocre code, right? Is getting it to make it easier we live in a world of, sprints and tickets and epics and all of that, right? We have our own jargon. If it was something where, like you say, that person in a product manager or marketing or something could dynamically ask it, okay, where is dev at? Or where is product at? To make that communication easier, that would be something really, really valuable. Because I think it's possible, right? Because, yeah.
Yeah. So in development right now, what we're doing is we're providing instructions to AI to do stuff for us. But who was that said that? I think it was, oh God, I forgot the name of the scientist. I think it was Peters who came up with, yeah, I think it was Dr. Peters, but don't quote me wrong, but he said that we need to change the knowledge workers. Like when we can start evolving the knowledge workers instead of improving the manual workers, that's when we're going to go into another shift. AI kind of has given us that. But so far, we're providing instructions to AI. When AI starts providing instructions to us in engineering and product, automatically, without us lifting a finger or asking a prompt, that is exactly where the biggest value is going to lie. And, because somebody operating that business can know about symptoms and things and detect all these patterns that are happening.
Yeah.
Do we have the churn? Do we have failures? Do we have a lot of support? Where are bugs coming from? What's working? What's not working? What we should build? What we shouldn't build? Because we operate on a lot of incomplete information and noise, and make our decisions on what we're going to build and what we're not going to build based on just subjective interpretation.
There's a YouTuber and Twitch streamer called Primogen, and he's more on he's open to AI. I don't want to completely categorize his viewpoint from the small number of videos I've watched. But one of the ones I watched, he was like, he described it as, restraining AI to do the fun thing, to write the code, by us doing the thing we don't like, which is writing the documentation. So we're writing a bunch of documentation, when in reality, we want to write the code and AI to write the documentation. And to go back to the point I said about AI generating mediocre code, I think it's the reason why OpenAI and some of the AI companies are mooted to try to creating a GitHub replacement or a GitHub iteration, right? Because if we go back to the real kind of crux of what AI is, it is at its fundamental core a stochastic process. The stochastic parrot term was used early on, still used less so now. But it's all, and again, grossly oversimplifying it. When all this machine is doing is trying to predict the next best word, it can only go from what it's been trained on. Now, it's no shock to anyone that if it's been trained on a whole bunch of the public GitHub repos, there's going to be a lot of code. And that's going to follow a distribution, and it's always going to take the highest peak. And that highest peak is always going to be mediocre, is maybe a bad word, good, average, passable code. And it's always going to generate that unless you find a way of getting around it or it learns to get better. But that's the bit that I think is so really, to me, telling, is we need to make sure that when we are generating this code, when we are doing these things, when we are looking at the outputs, understanding that where it's come from, it may look intelligent, it may seem intelligent. But if I had somebody who read the entire internet and was potentially overtrained on it 1,000 times, right? Of course it would look intelligent. But you ask it something it doesn't know, shocker, you get hallucinations because it's not inside of its training set. And I think the real risk that I think exists, and I agree with you, if we can get it to the point of it giving us instructions, that'd be great, but it has to give us the right instructions. It has to be able to look at things it's never seen before, interpret them correctly. I was going to say understand, but understand has an emotive context to it, right? Interpret it correctly, and then go, right, okay, here's what it is. But what I have always done when I build any AI, data, technology strategy is say you should never follow in somebody else's footsteps, because all that will do is get you to their destination, not yours. And the worry that I would have is I do not see, and I'll be happily corrected if I'm wrong, I do not see a way in which generative AI can create something which is bespoke or unique. Back to that point, right? It can read thousands of development plans. It can't ideate. So it can only go, well, when another company's been here, they've done this.
In terms of the daily use of AI, what are your thoughts about AI kind of exposing structural issues, right? Because the more and more people start relying on it, the more things look messy. And, I almost feel like everybody's being overpromised of this 100 or 10x engineer, and people are just trying to produce those 10x engineers, but they don't realize that what they do is they grab their 1x engineer and make it a half x engineer. And even though it looks to a certain degree of a short period time as a 10x, like initially that wears off, and then the work builds up in a bunch of other places, and just the structure starts falling apart. I almost feel like use of AI is really good in very, very small teams, but as soon as you grow a little bit bigger, it just, it starts turning into chaos.
There's two things I say to that. One, the low-hanging fruit theory.
Okay.
And two, AI enables everything to happen faster, right? So low-hanging fruit, by that I mean, well, of course it's going to be able to do that. Because at the end of the day, you know, I know, anyone who's worked in the business knows, of course it's disorganized, of course it's destructured. It's the biggest complaint that Steve over in finance doesn't know what the hell he's doing. And there are literal Instagram accounts, which the entirety of it is, what, Tom? Right? Whereas you get a Teams call or a Slack call and you're like, why are you calling me? Because I want to do things which HR would have a problem with, right? So AI exposing those structural inefficiencies, yeah, it's easy to do so, right? Because instead of somebody who's walking around like, I'm not going to say the name because it could be slanderous, right? But like a Big Four consultancy with a laptop, with a laptop and a gilet, going, yeah, absolutely, right? No, totally. Let's book that in. Those fake looking busy people are going to be exposed by AI. Because instead of it being, oh yeah, it's going to take 2 weeks to create that deck, you'll have someone going like, I can create it in 2 hours. And that's slow, right? So I think that's going to expose that. And everything happening faster is because AI enables a faster turnover, right? To that point, you can create things faster with the normal caveat of ideation versus replication and prompting, etc., right? but you can do things faster. You can iterate faster. We've seen it in the startup space. It has entirely obliterated seed rounds where they're like, I need 100K to go build a prototype. VCs and investors are going, no, not anymore. We are not going to give you that money.
They want the working product and they want customers on it already,
Yeah.
and they want you to have revenue and they want you to have a lot of stuff. But that trend has started even long before AI.
I know, but it's now it is just irrevocable, right? Before we were seeing it because of financial problems, right? We were seeing it because they didn't want to say no, they wanted to say yes if. And that round inflation.
Always say it.
Yeah, I know. Come speak to us when you've done this, and by the time you've done that, you're on the next, check mark list. But the bigger problem that I see in that, and it's something that, when I work with investors, I advise them, which is you have to recognize and understand your position. There was an investor I worked with once upon a time who had two products in front of them. It was a pitch day. One of them had a great product, but no customers. One of them had a wait list of customers, but no product. And he said to the first, I want the product. I said, I want customers. Said to the second, I want product. And I said to them, these guys are pre-seed. If they had both, they wouldn't be talking to you.
Yep.
And now with these VCs going, oh, we want to see 100 wow. Well, they have 100 weekly active users and they're revenue generating. Why do they need your investment? Why do they need your 2x preferential stock? Why do they need you? Why do they need you to force them to keep on hiring at extortionate rates, causing bloat, causing problems, causing issues, and then causing a situation where they need you again?
It's also harder for them to start evaluating things. They're having trouble evaluating just like anybody else. They take a look at things at face value, and then it doesn't help that everybody's arguing the pre-agreed fiction.
Yeah.
Right? So hey, where are you going to be in 3 years? Show me your, revenue projections. And that's so, whatever you're going to pull out of whatever end. Now with AI, guess what happens? People generate these pitch decks in like 3 minutes and they all sound the same. They look the same. They say the same. And now what happens? You can't evaluate them because they all look good.
Yeah. I had a startup have a brilliant pitch deck. And I advised the investor I was working with to invest in them, but it fell through. And their whole point was, why do you need the money? Well, we have a product. We don't have customers. We need to spend it on marketing. And the investor was like, oh, yeah, but you should be able to go out and do it. But to your point that you said earlier, Alex, well, how? We can't get the name out there. We can't get the brand out there. We're doing these thought leadership pieces, but LinkedIn's entirely like suppressing us now. We're getting 100 impressions. God alone, we provide a link. And their whole point was, well, we've got the product, we've got the brand, we've got everything. We need to spend money on marketing. And that was, I think, where a lot of the early stage is going to really be, is on that marketing aspect, on getting that growth, on generating that traction. Because without that, you don't have a product, really, do you?
Which makes it very good if you're in B2C space, because you're kind of on the same level field with all other B2C companies, even in the same space, even competitors, like you were in the open field. But in the B2B space, ooh, that's rough. You have all of these big companies with billions of dollars in valuations, and they can spend and shove your visibility all the way down to the bottom.
Oh, absolutely. But sorry, to go back onto the VC thing, my favorite slide in any, I would say up to Series A pitch deck.
Oh, is that where the Uber of everything?
Oh, no, the financial projections slide. I love that because it's where investors spend the most time. And I just looked at it and go, oh, look, a pretty graph. I'm going to put that on the fridge. That's a lovely graph there, Alex. I'm going to put that on the fridge and look at it every day and think how special it is. It's a myth. You don't have enough revenue. You don't have enough projections. You don't have enough data. But every VC, every investor wants to see this financial projection slide, which is 90% made up. You don't know what it's going to be in 3 years. You don't know what it's going to be in 5 years. Case in point, go back to 2018 and look at every financial projection slide deck, because it's always assuming everything is going to stay the same.
It's always off.
We had two main things happen in that 5-year period. First, COVID. Second, OpenAI. Right?
Yeah.
So it's that point of, this theater behind it. Whereas but in actuality, you've got so many, and I think you're going to find more and more businesses now, especially, you're going to find more and more entrepreneurs now who are affected by the layoffs, who are affected by layoffs in the industry.
So there's going to be dilution of attention.
Yeah. And you've now got
Right?
100 people saying, I've got this great business idea, and I think there's one thing that is, I am an AI advocate. I am not an AI hype bro. I'm not an AI Luddite, as the forums call them. I am an advocate in terms of, I think this could be really productive and really useful. However, the bit that we need to absolutely and fundamentally remember, it is not going to solve everything overnight. And for anyone to claim, oh, it's going to be this, it's going to be that, it's going to be the next thing, we don't know. It is such a money pit right now. But at the same time, you no longer have AI as a value prop. It's part of your tech stack now. Don't come and say AI does this. It isn't going to hit anymore.
So I have an interesting observation. I do a lot of writing as well, and I use AI to kind of fix my sentences, and I find that over time it's taking more and more aggressive look and changing the way I want things to look. It's changing my language. It's not just fixing some structural patterns or making improvements. It's making significant changes to the point where it's removing kind of my angles a lot of times. So over time, I have a feeling that AI is beginning to produce similar results for everybody. And the ideation that you're talking about, that differentiation of personal touch, understanding the actual problem to be solved, not by, having AI interpret things, but instead by actually having that individual thought process, individual approach, is gonna be the leading edge. Because think about it. Everybody, if there's more people working and more entrepreneurs are trying to make it big because all of a sudden they have the time, a 2-3 people team can produce results that previously took, 7, 10, 12 people team to produce.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can do that faster, then what's going to happen is there's going to be more companies talking to VCs, and they're going to produce the same charts, and they're going to use the same AI for the same presentations and the same pitches. And over time, they all going to look exactly identical. It's just like they're going to be a copy. So the only difference will be who's going to actually be authentic.
Yeah, I found the exact same thing. And I've stopped using it so much because now I'm realizing that my bad grammar is actually a selling point for some of my writing, because people can tell it's not AI generated. But
and it has emotion.
Yeah. So what you're kind of highlighting is, what you've highlighted in that is what is being called the slopification of the internet. And what you're describing has a really significant impact inside of recruiting, right? Recruiting is complaining about this right now, right? Because what you've got is an area and an industry where everyone's taking their CV. Everyone is putting it into the same AI. Everyone is putting the same job description out. And your CV is now just the exact same thing generated by a bunch of people. And so the other point that you mentioned, where you can produce things really quickly, to an extent. So over Christmas, I created this thing for Demonstrandum, my consultancy, which I call the MVP booster, which we deployed for one client at the beginning of the year. It got their MVP in testing, in UAT, within 6 weeks. Because what the MVP booster does is build the user authentication, the admin setting, GDPR, privacy. I basically built the same thing that takes us 6 to 8 weeks to build every single time we start a project and do that.
So a toolkit.
Toolkit, basically. Fundamentally, it's a GitHub repo, which we can then clone and duplicate. But it's the foundation, right? Handles all the setup, handles all the environment management, does the foundational stuff.
It's always a pain. It's always
yeah.
The
stuff.
Yeah. Oh, why do I have to rebuild this 100 times, right?
Absolutely. So we did that, and we got clients who have used it to build, like I say, their MVP in 6 weeks. And I had a client who went to me, you should put your money where your mouth is. So what I've been doing is I went, okay, fine. Let's see if I can build a business in 100 hours, right? A proper business with MVP booster. So I'm talking the marketing, everything in that 100 hours. And why it's relevant is because the industry I'm going after is recruiting. So the company I've designed and created is called Profolia. And it's entirely designed around that point of you've got AIs talking to AIs who are doing substandard matching. Now, there will be recruiters, and I apologize now, in your comment section going, we look at everything individually. Fine, whatever. I'm not here to tell you. I'm not here to attack them on that, right? But the design of what I've built is to say, well, let's use AI for what it's good at, and let humans do what they're good at. So we started from two problem statements. One, how do we enable conversations faster, easier? And two, how do we stop, due to the number of applications we received, is unable to give feedback at this time from ever being sent again? And so it's weird how from those complaints and those issues about, oh, all CVs look the same, and that slopification, which you mentioned, that removal of personal trust, personal version, personal description, where we can keep that and use AI to extract the things which we need to match on, have users confirm it, get better inputs. There are ways in which we can use AI, but we're not, because it's difficult or it's not easy. But what I'm now saying is, well, okay, let's take this 100-hour business idea, let's build that. I'm building it chronically in public on Substack. So I'm keeping myself accountable. But what it then does is it addresses the slopification. I don't think it's ever going to change now. And you're right, we are losing that personal touch, that personal feeling, because AI writes like the average. The average person, it looks at it and goes, well, this wouldn't be the next suggested word, because no one's ever talked about how insert idea. So I'm going to say it.
The first company that's going to get rid of all this CV collecting and scanning and starts having real conversations, learning about people, maybe even testing them out because their skill sets can be tested with AI, right? You could say, hey, listen, develop something. People already do that. They share GitHub repos easily and say, hey, here's my work. Now, you can't always verify that it's their work or it was produced.
I see CVs are the point of like, you only verified the last second that everything you said is true, right? That's a whole other, yeah.
But if you build relationships and the relationships work that way that you know other people and potentially could build network of networks, but it's the in-person relationships that could lend people jobs better. You know, essentially companies follow recommendations instead of resumes. So I think that's the next kind of avenue.
But
again, swinging that rubber band back into personality versus, you know, anonymity.
The reason I chose Profolia as the idea, I had several where I was like, what do I want to develop in 100 hours? One of the main reasons I chose it was I think there is a real problem to be solved here. Because, and we go back to, I love the phrase and I hate the phrase, the slopification of offerings. You look at every job board, every single job application system. All they've done is taken the same broken ass process, slapped an AI chatbot over the top of it and gone, we now have AI powered search. That's not what people want. That's not the problem people are facing. But what we're getting to now is, and hopefully we're coming out the back of it, where people go, oh, I need to include AI in my product, so I'll just do a ChatGPT interface. No, there's so much more can be done. But what I'm finding, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, is people just bolting AI onto a broken system and going, yeah, see, now look at it. It's like, yeah, okay, you slapped a V8 engine onto the back of a donkey. It's not going to do anything and the donkey's going to die, right? So it really concerns me that in actuality and in practicality, we're not actually using AI. Well, there are companies, I'm not saying it's everyone, right? But especially inside of some of these industries, again, why I chose recruiting, they're just not innovating. They're replicating.
That's true. That's true. And they've been following that trend for a long time
Oh yeah.
since the CVs and keywords started being automated. I think the bigger problem is inside of large organizations that try to build a
Yeah.
machine for recruiting process, right? When you're running a smaller company, I've went ahead and after a single interview hired somebody. I've also
Mm.
fired people 2 days after
Mm.
because if I have an engineer that couldn't set up their environment in a day and already solve one of the small bugs or small features, I don't want that engineer on my team. As a startup, I just don't have the luxury for that.
Mm.
But in a big enterprise, the probationary period is 3 months. They'll first put you through like a weekly training session for all internal processes, procedures, and HR stuff, and ethics training and whatever else that's totally not applicable. The best way to test somebody is really at a job. So you need a system that quickly finds somebody, gives them opportunity, and stops this fear of missing out. We want to talk to 25 people or 50 people
Oh,
and then pick from
I've
them.
hired the first person I've spoken to,
Yeah,
like because it's funny. If you meet someone and go, you can do the job. What am I going to do by interviewing somebody else?
wasting
I'll
your time and everybody else's.
I'll do the interviews that are scheduled because I'm not rude. But I've said to the recruiter before, stop the interviews because I know at least one of them is going to do the job, so I don't need to speak to anymore.
Which is different from the bigger companies because if that's
Yeah.
their entire job.
Now, look, that exists and that happens, but there's another one in there which kind of bugs me a lot more. AI video screening.
Oh yeah.
That, oh my God. If you can just say to I've been saying to people I mentor, because I do mentor because I found it valuable. So I always want to do that for other people too, hopefully. Hopefully they find it valuable. I don't know. They still show up to the meeting, so there must be something valuable there, right? I've said to them, that is the best signal you could have received. They're like, oh, why? It's like, well, because you don't have to waste your time. Because if they can't be bothered to show up, why should you? If you want to know your culture, if you want to know the culture of that organization, the fact that and especially for tech developers, where their first thought is, you want me to give you my voice data, my video data, my likeness, so you can, no, off, to use a very Scottish parlance, and you might have to bleep this, off you fuck. Like, no. In the direction you go. No, I'm not going to do that. But again, that's another example, right? Where what I'm trying to build with Portfolio in 100 hours, and I'm 50 hours in, and it's going pretty well, right? Is something which solves the root problem. Because everyone's looking at the root problem going, oh, without replacing the CV, it's impossible. Maybe not. And well, I can get into that a whole other time. What they're looking at is going, okay, well, let's save time on the back end. Right? Let's make AI screening faster. But that's not helping anyone because all you're doing is just kicking the filtering stage down the road. You're not having good conversations. You're just having lots of digital ones.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in the industry are in such a weird rush to do things faster instead of to do what's important.
Move fast, break
It's
things. It's been the mantra of our
yeah,
industry for the past 15 years.
there's a lot of like bad advice. Like I'll give you an example. So let's say you organized based on priority goals. We talked about churn. So let's say our priority is churn. And we identify some amount of work that needs to be done to tackle that goal. Well, the leadership keeps screaming, faster, 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 faster. And I'm like, why faster? If it's our number one goal, don't we want to nail it right? Like, why we want to be done with this faster? It's a lagging indicator. So we'll need at least a year to find out if it really worked, but why faster? So that we
These
could work on less important priority thing next. Like, why don't we nail this correctly? Let's take our time. Let's do it right. Let's not cut corners.
But Alex, the problem you've got there is you're talking common sense. These are the same exact people who will use AI as the reason for redundancies right now. AI isn't the reason for redundancies. Redundancies are not caused by a piece of technology. And more importantly, You don't make redundancies for something that's happened now. You make redundancies to stop something happening in the future. I'm getting to a whole rant about all these AI layoffs and everything. No, it's not. It's the fact that we overhired during COVID. We're now staring down the barrel of a potentially global
We need an
recession.
excuse.
And we need an excuse that the shareholders are going to like. Shareholders aren't going to like, oops, we fucked up. We overhired. We need to make redundancies. That's going to send share price tumbling. But AI unlocks all these potentials, sends them happy.
And
But
by the way, notice that it's mostly US based companies that are doing this.
yeah, I mean, the UK isn't immune from that. However, there are situations where the UK is just being a lot more honest and going, well, we had a merger, so all of you can go away now. We may be a polite nation, but we are a blunt one too.
Well, it's just that there are European countries generally are much more conservative in their hiring. They're not trying to run like crazy and dump a lot of investment. And the same thing about protecting the workplace as well. So I think some of the social norms are very different. US-based companies are a lot more aggressive. Let's hire quick. Let's get them all moving. Oh, shoot. We want to make more money. Let's cut them quickly as well. It
And
also doesn't help that kind of Jack Welch set the standard a long, long time ago that 10% will go every year. And they're running the same playbook, always cutting the 10%.
yeah. But you know, as well as something you talk about that hyper growth fixation, like you can see it so evidently in with Dario and Sam and Elon. They're always constantly selling a narrative, selling a thing. And what's brilliant is apart from a few people who are calling them out on it, you know, and I know we're nearly at our time. There was a graph that I saw, which was a waffle chart, which had the fact of there are 20% of the global population have ever used an AI chatbot. 10% of them pay 0.2, like whatever it was, right? We're still at the dawn of this. And you've got Sam and Elon, and Dario is the worst for it. Dario, in a year's time, 90% of code will be written by AI. And it caught headlines and everyone's like, oh, we love you, let's throw money at it. And it raised investment rounds and we do everything. I'd have to admit, though, I have to eat a bit of crow on that one because I think he was right. But what everyone thought at the time was 90% of the code that exists right now is going to be written by AI. No. The code that exists, maybe 10, 15% of that's now written by AI. What we didn't expect was a huge volume in the amount of code that's going to be written. And all of that new code that's being written is being written by AI. And I think that's that distinction and change where we're in an industry, or we're in the midst of an industrial revolution. You know, we talked about the fourth industrial revolution with the Internet of Things. That really didn't kind of play out very well. But we are in the midst of an industrial revolution. And I think what we're seeing more and more at the moment is that Americanized hype cycle of driving that, always going for that 100x, always going for that growth. When in reality, I think it's important that, especially I imagine your audience for this, what we need to do is realize we are in the eye of the storm. We know what's going on. We think everything is fantastic. But step outside of it, AI is not liked. They don't like the AI scam calls. They don't like the AI call centers. They don't like the AI chatbot. They don't like the AI email response. They don't like AI video interviews. They don't like AI generated images, AI generated content, AI artists, AI articles, the slopification.
All of this service.
All of the things which we are going, oh my God, look how brilliant. The majority of your customer base is fed up of it and looking at it like, I don't care. This does not look good. I am not a fan of it. And I think that's the bit where, for us, we look at it at, oh my God, it's going to change everything. Well, it has, and it will, and I think it will continue to do so. It's irrevocable right now. Worst case, they all go bust, and we're all going to have to figure out how to code again after 2 years of kicking our feet up. That's the worst case, right? But
I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think
Nah.
there are places where it's going to be consistently applied. But I think you're right. The quality of the product produced because of the involvement with AI is drastically different. I'll give you an example. I worked with somebody in marketing, really bright consultant. I've recommended this person to a couple other companies, really did a great job, thorough analysis, everything was beautiful. And then a couple of years after, invited this person to participate in my projects as well. But instead, this was post the OpenAI era. Instead, what I received was stuff that I could have spun out just basically asking a prompt. And I felt so cheated, right?
Yeah.
Where it was no longer an individual thought process, evaluation. It wasn't the effort. And it was just something put together real quick. And it was the same thing that I already knew. So it wasn't really adding a lot of value. And so I think eventually, just like we're talking about, that rubber band is going to swing in the opposite direction. But so Simon, let me ask you a few questions, because I
Yes.
think we kind of had
We've
this
yeah,
conversation.
we've had a good rambling rant like two old men sitting shouting at clouds. Yes. So
Which is very enjoyable, and I
as
could do it
always.
for a long
Oh
time.
yeah.
But I thought I'd ask you a couple questions, because I know that you work with a lot of small companies and a lot of large companies, and so I'm curious about what you're seeing. For example, what are some things that small teams get right and large companies consistently screw up? Like what are some things that can be learned from that?
We spoke about it earlier on. So a lot of the companies I work with are either B2B or B2C, and they are surprisingly predominantly software. There's a couple where I've worked with which are more traditional goods, but the majority are software. Where a lot of small companies are getting it right, a lot more than big companies, is getting stuff into the hands of users faster, right? And we spoke about it, right? The process and the gunking up of the machine of, well, I've shipped it, now it has to go to PR and code review, and then from code review, it has to go to QA, and then from QA, it has to go to sales, and then sales has to figure it out, so marketing has to do, goes through that. Small businesses are very good at least in my experience, and whether that's because they don't have the process, just getting it out into the hands of users, tracking it, building. The thing that I have written so much during the 100-hour business project is, I'm not happy with this UX, but I'm not the arbiter of good. The arbiter of good is going to be the customer. I might think it's terrible, but if my customers love it, my opinion is relevant, right? And we're seeing it with some of the companies now trying to do that. Ironically, we're actually seeing bugs coming out of large companies more than small companies with this. LinkedIn, for example, I don't know what caused it, but did you have the situation where it changed languages on you a couple of weeks ago? I had my entire LinkedIn feed turned Spanish and Korean and German. Luckily, I can speak 2 of those 3 languages, but but I mean, so
Yeah.
I think where a lot of small companies are doing better is in that speed of getting things into the hands of users. And I think we forget, and maybe it's by design, but anything where the product is the customer using it, we need to get their opinion first, because we can have a lot of whole thoughts and ideas, and that's where A/B testing comes into its own value, right? But if the customer likes it, it's relevant.
Yeah, I have my own thoughts about the whole feature flag mentality of delivering new changes and just throwing it into the audience. It's almost, sometimes I feel like as a user of some tool, I'm all of a sudden becoming their beta tester. And I don't want to be a tester. I want to continue using the system. Like
There,
I'll give you an example. The podcast tool that we're using, every
yeah,
time I log in, there's something different, which in certain degree, they improve certain things, but in other degrees, they actually change. And we're going back to that change management where,
yeah.
I really don't want to change. I just want it to work.
Now, there are ways in which that can be mitigated, and a lot of the stuff I tend to advise customers is if you're using your audience pool as a pure testing bed. Now, what I meant by that is they're getting new features out, but if we're talking about the QA testing, the beta testing mentality, you can integrate quite a lot of, if you're providing a service or a product, tokenization, rewardism, gamification metrics of, hey, Alex, be part of this and we'll give you 2 hours free or something like that.
I don't mind when they're asking, but I don't want them to just swap something on me without a warning. And that kind of bothers me a little bit. But,
Yeah.
it's just, maybe it's me. I'm very
No,
conservative. I'm very conservative. I'm also never an early adopter.
But
So
like you change management, people are scared of change and they like what they know and they don't like when when it changes on them. But I mean, honestly, like in terms of, and look, in terms of the small businesses versus large businesses, their ability to ideate and iterate quickly is where it wins. But again, that is also a double-edged sword because you can end up in bad situations too. So it's all swings and roundabouts. That's the main thing I noticed different.
if you were to imagine, let's say in 5 years, a really well-run product or tech organization, what do you think it would look like?
Good question. First and foremost, it would be properly integrated into the business. Tech businesses, product departments inside of businesses very much are, and the analogy I use, it's a modern extension bolted onto a Victorian house. The business structure and ecosystem really hasn't changed. And what we tend to do right now is bolt new functionalities on. And it's been the exact same since I was still in school, you know, in the dot-com era where tech teams became popular in the 2000s. We're still seeing the fact that it was just bolted on. You know, my initial joke wouldn't hit so much with the tech nerd who learned how to speak human. It wouldn't still hit if there wasn't a problem with businesses not having an integrated tech team. So first and foremost, the technology department would be properly integrated within the business. There would be ways in which that facilitation of requirements and deliverables would be communicable, would be understandable. There would be a smooth way in which of operating, right? And I think, you know, the ideal way in which I would see that is kind of akin to a marketing department, right? Marketing is service, marketing is a service, marketing is transactional, marketing operate and they have very clear parameters, you know, and a well-run marketing department is a beautiful thing. And I think it's similar to that in terms of design. In terms of structure, I think what you're finding a lot more now is those teams are much smaller. I think it would be clearly defined objectives. I am framework agnostic. I say I like to do lists, and I angered the Agile crowd once upon a time, and they're like, "But that's Agile." Anyway, just a way in which of tracking and knowing what needs to be done, but clear expectation, clear deliverables, clear value outputs on we're doing this because. I think that's an understated descriptor, which everyone can use now. We are doing this because. We call them epics, we call them stories, we call them whatever. Fine. We are doing this because. Answers the WGAF test, and it makes it clear, and it will help developers as well, because a lot of them can think, well, if we're doing it because we need to make the buttons more compliant for people with visibility issues, I'm not going to use a 10-point font, right? And it does a lot. So I think we'll see a reduced number of developers for sure. I think we will end up seeing quite a heavy token usage, whether that is internal. We're going to move to on-prem. We saw it with cloud, right? We've seen it with, like, you know, we've seen it with situation, well, not necessarily on-prem, but you know what I mean, the multi-tenant.
Another rubber band swing, right?
Yeah. I mean, you might actually see a lot of on-prem actually because they're cheaper. But anyway, we're going to see severe multi-tenanted systems because when we back in the multinational org I worked at, we developed products. We were trying to be a small, innovative team, developing a lot of things. We were doing R&D. And what we actually found was we developed it, but the client's first thing was, yeah, but it needs to be inside of our stack. I think that's what we're going to see with a lot of AI is it moving towards that pure multi-tenant, isolated architecture. But I think it will be smaller. I think what we're looking at is probably 1 or 2 pods rather than the 5 or 6 pods that we currently have right now. With a pod being a couple of front end, couple of back end, and some kind of QA testing and some kind of probably an ML engineer will be a de facto necessity due to the amount of modeling and testing we're doing.
Gotcha. I don't disagree with you. I think there's going to be a big change from the use of like the big systems.
Yeah.
Like every company needs to buy Salesforce. What for? They only use 10% of that, right? So essentially, integrate solutions that actually fit the business.
Yeah.
And there's going to be like a resurgence of our own proprietary internal software and solutions because building things is going to be less costly rather than buying something. Now, depending on the specialization, right? So obviously, if you need like a full-blown CRM system that needs to be extremely robust and blah, 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 then maybe you want to buy Salesforce still. But I think there'll be a different question.
I think
You know, you'll
we are definitely seeing the end of the pure SaaS economy as we once were. But again, for a small business, vibe coding their own Salesforce is going to work. But for a multinational, it's the functionality, it's the
probably.
existing. And again, it goes back to that point where I had that guy, great meeting, fantastic meeting, loved everything I said. But when Simon, why would I go for Demonstrandum when I can go for KPMG, when I can go for McKinsey, when I can go for Accenture?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to go with them. You're going to see the same thing, I think, because...
But we're still coming up with generational shift.
Yeah. But again,
so slowly but surely.
We're also coming into ingrained behavior, coming into the challenge of I do this because it's what I was taught. We go for the point of nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. You know, especially when you...
But it'll start going away because, you know, again, going back to how we started the conversation, right? The tech leaders will now be a lot more versed in the tech and in business. They will have to.
It will only go away. Okay, screw it, I'm going to say it. It will only go away if we get rid of the Americanization of the workforce. And by that, I mean the Americanization of a workforce culture is blame. Whose fault was it? That is such a key thing. Hire fast, fire fast, Americanization concept. You know, and maybe I'm being overly harsh.
Well, it's true. The loyalty has shifted. The concept of loyalty has really went away.
Yeah. And I mean, what was it? It wasn't Henry Ford. It was somebody who said the fact that the American work culture didn't go the way in which they wanted to, so they instituted the work culture in Japan. Whereas you live at your desk, you die at your desk, and you do everything for the business, right? But in that environment where it's so based upon live and die for the company, blame is tantamount. And as I've seen it time and time again, I have seen people afraid to make a mistake. It's like, I'm going to get fired. Because blame happens and you fucked up, you get fired. So all of this will only happen if we remove that blame culture from the workforce. And whether it's Americanization or not, we can get into a debate. But once we remove that, that will enable change to happen because we're creating an environment where experimentation and those things can happen, right? So yes, but only if we actually create an environment, because you get what you measure. And right now, the measurement is safety. It's never going to innovate change in that type of environment.
Nice. Well, this has been an awesome podcast, Dr. Simon. Can I just call you Dr. Simon?
You
I think
can.
I like Dr. Simon.
I mean, funny, I'll end it with this. When Alex first reached out to me, it was via LinkedIn. And the only reason I responded was you said, "Hi, Simon." On LinkedIn, my first name is Dr. Simon. And I use it as a filter to stop people who use the AI outreach or MCP outreach. I think LinkedIn has an MCP, but like the AI agentic outreach, where it's like, "Hi, Dr. Simon," like I'm some kind of bootleg Dr. Nick from The Simpsons, right? If they say that, I ignore their messages.
Oh, you just dropped a tidbit, so be careful.
I publish that frequently, and you know what? Never changes.
And still nobody found it. Okay.
I mean, that could be said with LinkedIn algorithms, but it still doesn't happen because all they do is they go squarely brackets, first name, and my first name on LinkedIn, Dr. Simon. So
nice.
It's been a very enjoyable conversation. I think we are in exciting times, but you know the old Chinese curse: "May you live in interesting times." I think we are definitely in those right now, but. The main thing that I have seen over this past while is, in general, hype will kill businesses. Hype will kill ideas.
I think the advice for a lot of companies, both early stage and scale ups, start acting like you're a horse with those little side blinds on.
Yeah.
Just stay your mission. Don't worry about the noise. Don't pay attention to the competition. You have enough news that are coming into you. You don't need to pivot and turn every single day.
There was a brilliant thing that I was told, and I didn't believe it, but now I do. Never forget that anything you see on social media is fake. And that's true of LinkedIn. That's true of press releases. That's true of awards. You mentioned it. Awards tend to go to the person who spent the most and bought the most tables of the awards. Like, not all of them, allegedly, all that stuff, right? But on the whole, it's there. But the fact is, in reality, they're doing the exact same thing. They're just better at getting the narrative out there. So, like you say, blinders. I have worked with a startup who the guy came into every single meeting after he met with the client going, we're switching to this. Why? The client said they buy it if we use this. And yeah, of course he told you that. He told you what he wants to hear. No. They promised that they would use it if we built this. Stop what you're doing. We're going to go to there. 6 weeks later, no. Another client said this. Go back to what you're working on. And it's just, it's operate with blinders, and just, there are points where you have to listen to outside signals. But the skill of leadership is identifying signal from noise. Doing my favorite analogy from a TV show called Mythbusters many years ago now. If you close your eyes and walk in a straight line, you end up walking in circles.
Circle, yeah.
So, yeah. But no, it has been an absolute pleasure, Alex, as always.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you, Simon.
Thank you for having
guys,
me.
I'm going to leave Dr. Simon's LinkedIn and contact info. So
I'll also ask you to stick the Substacks in there as well.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. No problem. Happy to add any information.
Fantastic.
And, guys, like I said, Simon is an expert in a lot of areas. So if you want to connect, strongly advised. He's a wealth of information and just somebody really, really good to know. Simon, thank you. Have a good one. This was awesome.
Thank you very much. Same to you. Bye for now.
All right. Bye.